Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking at what's been a historic breakthrough in those Iran nuclear negotiations. 18 marathon days after 22 months of negotiations, 12 years of work, and they have reached an agreement. With us from Vienna, France 24's Sanam Sethi, who's been following the last push of those negotiations. From Boston, Kelly Goldish, editor-in-chief of Tehran Bureau, the website. From Washington, Lee Smith, senior editor at the Weekly Standard. And here in our studios, Israeli-born journalist Gil Meheli, editor-in-chief of Causeur.fr. And as well, Jamshid Asadi of the Burgundy Business School. When it seemed certain that we would have a Bastille Day deal, Barack Obama was up bright and early, 7 a.m. local time, to react.
Our differences are real, and the difficult history between our nations cannot be ignored. But it is possible to change. The path of violence and rigid ideology, a foreign policy based on threats to attack your neighbors or eradicate Israel, that's a dead end. A different path, one of tolerance and peaceful resolution of conflict, leads to more integration into the global economy, more engagement with the international community, and the ability of the Iranian people to prosper and thrive. This deal offers an opportunity to move in a new direction. We should seize it.
Lee Smith, we've seen the Republican reactions on Capitol Hill saying they're going to fight this tooth and nail now during the review period. But shouldn't Washington be banking on a nation that has thriving middle class, a nation of 80 million?
Look, I mean, if we were really banking on that, if this administration had really banked on that, among other things, the White House, the Obama administration might have backed the Green movement back in June 2009. It didn't, and we know why they didn't, because they wanted to deal with this particular regime, and that's what I keep coming back to. We would very much like to see an opening that would moderate, that would reward the Iranian people, and that would hurt the hardliners, that would make room for the Iranian people for moderation.
So you're
and
contending
tolerance.
that they'd prefer to do that back in 2009 when there were
Absolutely.
those street protests.
Absolutely, yes.
The authorities in Washington preferred to do business with the hardliners.
Absolutely. I mean, this was a New Yorker piece. I believe it was Ryan Lizza, maybe 2012, 2013, when they were talking with a former administration official who said that. And we know that this is the case. The president said in an NPR interview in April, he said, look, whether it moderates Iran or not, it's still a good deal. The administration is not that concerned with whether or not the behavior of the regime becomes more moderate. In fact, you can make an argument that they're interested in the hard men of the regime, they're interested in the IRGC, they're interested in Quds Force, because they believe that these are the people who get things done in the region, that they can manage American interests in the region, and that they can bring stability to the region. The person they're really looking at is not Hassan Rouhani, it's Qasem Soleimani. That's the person that this deal invests in. It's the Quds Force, it's the hardliners, it's not moderate Iranians. The president, we know from a foreignpolicy.com piece, when the president was speaking at Camp David with different Arab officials, he was saying, look, the Iranians are a problem, but you Arabs might want to think of getting up your own Quds Force, because they can manage things around the region. That's who the deal is for. It's for the hardliners, not for the moderates.
Kelly Goldish, do you agree?
To some extent, I do. There was a story a few weeks ago from the Wall Street Journal that essentially was saying that the Obama administration engaged in what they didn't say, but quoted as saying a swap of prisoners in order to signal to the hardliners that they're interested in talking to them. And they did. They released 4 Iranian prisoners. And during that, in 2009, Obama's response to the protests was so subdued that people in Iran were asking me what's going on with him. So I think they were involved. They didn't believe enough in the fact that there was going to be any kind of change, and they didn't really support the Green movement. But I think where I differ is that change in Iran happens inadvertently. I don't think Obama and the hardliners have that much power to, to kind of cement things the way that they want to. And if any change is going to happen, it's going to happen inadvertently. And I think that's why some of the staunchest holdouts in Iran and the hardline camp are afraid that this kind of deal is going to open up Iran the way Gorbachev did the Soviet Union. So to that extent, yes, I agree with Lee. And then after that, I think that they don't have that much power. And to the extent that the IRGC thinks that they're a stakeholder in this agreement, then they will be interested in moderating the way they do business in the region.
Let me put a question here to Sanam Sethi. Sanam, when those negotiations were going on in Vienna, did you have the impression, obviously, we know that, they report back to the president, they report, who has to report back to the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, but did you have the impression that the negotiators were the decision makers, or that they were just a front for more hardliners?
No, absolutely not. The Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif would not have been able to spearhead this campaign of what he's referring to as diplomacy if he didn't have the mandate from Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And if you recall, over the past 18 days, Zarif actually made a trip back to the Iranian capital to get that stamp of approval. We know that when it comes to Iran, if we have to be very clear-cut about it, there are two different groups. One of them are, of course, the supporters of the more reformist President Hassan Rouhani. They voted for him in the presidential election in 2013 because he wanted and he called for a détente with the international community for the lifting of sanctions and the flourishing of the economy. And then another group, what we're referring to as hardliners, who have been opponents to a deal because they're the very group that have been benefiting from these sanctions. But what we've seen in Iran over the past few months, certainly since the interim agreement in Geneva in 2013, is that Ayatollah Khamenei has managed to actually tow in the opponents to a deal. What happened earlier last month was Iran, the Iranian parliament, Majlis, removed the power from itself to review and vote on that final agreement. So they were supposed to do essentially what the US Congress is doing, but now it's been handed over to the country's Security Council. In fact, I spoke to an Iranian source earlier. He told me that they feel that the American negotiators face a much bigger fight at home when they return with that agreement in hand, as opposed to the Iranian negotiators.
Of course, a lot of people are comparing it. We just heard Kelly Goldish talk about comparing it to those who are comparing it to Glasnost. We heard people talking about other comparisons. Just to remind viewers that since the 1979 Iranian Revolution and the U.S. Embassy hostage crisis that ensued, Washington and Tehran have not had formal relations. We've just gotten a statement from Russia's foreign minister saying this deal paves the way for a broad coalition against the Islamic State. Do you see this, Iran, part of the concert of nations taking on ISIS?
Absolutely not. I don't think so. I would like to come back on one of the Mr. Resmith's comment that he says that we did not bank on moderation, we did not bank on freedom and democracy. But was that on the agenda of Mr. Obama's administration? I don't think so. I think what the Obama's administration was looking for was mainly two things: opening up a very huge big market on one hand, and on the other hand, outsourcing fighting against Daesh in the region. So there was no democracy and freedom on the agenda. I'm not surprised. However, I'm very happy for the Iranian people because Iran was to pay a lot and suffers from damages without any profit benefit getting out of this nuclear program general. So this is what I think. Number two, coming back to your question, no, I don't think that we can expect, because they have finally signed this agreement, Islamic Republic is going to be a normal actor in the region for a kind of a stabilization that we expect for the region. It could be, there is some chances, but most likely, if the country continues acting like this, I don't think so. We need more to put in order to push the country toward a more normalcy than as it was the case before.
Jamshid Asadi, you've not been back in 2 decades to your native Tehran. Is what happened today going to change that in any way?
I don't think anything is going to change for the civil society. I don't think anything has changed for people like me to get back or for people in prison to get out of the prison. I just remind you that 2 of the leaders, 2 of the big figures of the regime now are in kind of prison in Iran. Nothing has changed for them. So I think this is a kind of saying that I don't touch you, you don't touch me in the region. I would call it, I'm very happy for the Iranian people. But I think politically, I consider that this is a kind of Cold War. We're not going to act as this in the same camp. We are not going to be friends. Don't expect us to be like you. However, if you respect my interest in the region, I respect your interest in the region.
What you're saying, in a sense, is that the Iranians can keep a lid on growing expectations to a certain degree.
That would be a big delusion if we say after this agreement, the society is going to open up and the prisoners are going to be out of prisons and people like me can get back to the country, and women correspondents like you're having here can appear in the street like he is now on your camera.
Just a word about ISIS.
Can I ask you a quick question? Do you mind if I ask you a quick question?
ISIS didn't exist 14 months ago. And the nuclear negotiation, it took 10 years. So it's not a problem that didn't exist 14 months ago that matters that much. This is one thing. Second, I don't think that the Iranian government will ever do something which is against its interest. And even before the agreement, there was some cooperation between Iranians and Americans in Iraq. So they didn't need the Iraqi. I think that the ISIS thing is just to sell the agreement on both sides. But it's not a fundamental issue.
Lee Smith?
Yeah, I just want to ask one question. I entirely agree with that. I think that the agreement over ISIS, I think it's not fundamental. I think it is helping sell the deal, certainly in Washington. I know that's a big part of it, that we can work with the Iranians on ISIS. And again, I said ISIS is clearly a problem. The issue is, or one question is, how much will the United States and Iran working on ISIS actually solve the issue, or what's going to happen? The question I want to ask before is, look, God bless the Iranian people who have certainly been through a lot, whether it's sanctions or whether it's their own terrible regime, the terrible things that the regime has done to the Iranian people, imprisoning them, murdering them, torturing them. What about the other people around the region? And I'm not just talking about the Israelis. I'm talking about the people around the region like the Syrians, like Syrian Sunnis. I'm talking about Iraqis. I'm talking about Lebanese. There are lots of people around the region who are going to suffer now that Iran has been, or the regime has been empowered by this deal. So I ask us to think about other people around the region as well, and we might as well think of the Israelis too. There are a lot of people around the region who are going to pay very dearly for this deal. The amount of money that the regime will now have in its bank accounts to create more trouble around the region, it's extremely dangerous.
Let's talk.
I wish there were a Syrian opposition person here that we could talk to and ask what they think about the deal. Or if there was a Lebanese Druze or a Lebanese Christian to talk about what they think about the deal. With this deal, let
me ask very pragmatically, Sanam Sethi, what does the deal say in terms of how those sanctions are lifted, and does it mean that the money will flow directly to the likes of Hezbollah and other proxy groups?
Not at all. I've been speaking to a number of prominent analysts here in the Austrian capital during the length of negotiations and even regarding a post-deal scenario. What everyone here is saying is that, as we know, Iran's currency, the rial, has been free-falling for some time now. The rial's been destabilized. Now, let me just talk about the number of different impacts that this will have. Obviously, we're going to have an end to this free fall. This will increase investor confidence, and it's not just with regard to imported goods. The average Iranian who has been suffering from volatile prices of basic goods like the price of chicken or even rice When I was living in Iran during the previous administration, I watched the price of bread double overnight. So that's certainly going to be brought an end to. The money is also going to be put towards job creation, according to the analysts here. At the moment, some 13 out of 100 male graduates are out of work. Now, according to some Iranian officials, it'll also be used for industry, investment, water resources, agriculture. Now, there's no questioning as to whether some of this will be leaked back to the IRGC, Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps. And of course, that's a concern that we're hearing from some of the panelists and other countries in the region that are Iran's rivals, like Saudi Arabia and Israel. But what we have to acknowledge here, that the one thing this will do is it will stop the illicit businesses, the black market.
All right, and high expectations in Tehran.
How will it do that? How will it stop their illicit businesses? I don't understand that.
Sanam Sethi?
Yeah, sorry.
How will it stop the illicit businesses?
Can you repeat the question?
The question was from Lee Smith. How will it stop this?
The idea is that the money that belongs to the country, what's being referred to frozen assets, that's 150 billion US dollars, is going to be going back to certain things that it's already been allocated to. So it's not going to end up in what was previously under Ahmadinejad's administration, which was referred to as being corrupt. It's actually been designated already. Now, Iran is obviously going to open up to international businesses. The French Foreign Minister, in fact, Laurent Fabius, briefed us earlier and said that they will be able to start dealing with the Iranians in the open market, and they won't be subject to penalties, because this will be done post the removal of the sanctions, and they're lining up large numbers of companies like Peugeot and Renault and Total. So this is going to be done legally through the eyes of the international community and under the agreements agreed by both sides of the negotiating table.
Again, I don't understand. What's going to be done legally? Iran, the IRGC spending on its foreign adventures, on its foreign wars, that's above board now?
The IRGC were the very people that were benefiting from the sanctions, hence the fact they didn't want this agreement to come to fruition.
All right, and high expectations right now in Tehran, with polls suggesting 6 out of 10 Iranians expect improvements fast.
After all this time, every Iranian would be happy. They went through a lot after all these years. Well, I'm happy anyway, and I think everyone is happy about it.
It's a good feeling for sure, removing the sanctions that have put a lot of pressure on our country. Some might say that everything was okay, but you can see the effects on people, and I hope that the conclusions of the agreement will be what we're looking for.
My personal opinion is that I wish they had done this sooner, so people wouldn't have gone through these difficulties.
Kelly Goldish, what have you gauged so far as to how high those expectations are in Tehran?
The expectations are very high, especially when you see that the polls are reflecting what they believe the deal means, and the kind of relief that they expect and how quickly they expect it. I think that the most important factor is going to be the psychological relief and the hope that is going to hopefully fuel the Iranian people. I think, despite the rhetoric and the propaganda about Iran's, threat to the West or to the region, the reality from my experience is that the Iranian government is most of a threat to its own people. And I think as Iranians, we have some things to worry about. I think that in terms of civil society and in terms of certain freedoms, they are going to crack down on that, especially as the remaining realm of the hardliners keeps shrinking. They're going to probably use it with greater force. So I hope I'm wrong. I hope that if this happens, it's temporary, and the step forward is going to outdo any backpedaling on these issues.
Certainly, in the immediate reaction is the hardliners playing it low key for the time being. But Kelly Goldish, of course, there's a big chance that those benefits, the easing of sanctions, won't be felt very soon by ordinary citizens. At that point in time, will President Hassan Rouhani be severely undermined?
I think he could be, but it might be like what it was like in the Khatami administration in the mid-1990s, the late 1990s, where people weren't happy. The administration was co-opted within 2 years, and even though the Iranians were wailing when they came up against, the choice of, Khatami again and someone worse, they voted for Khatami. So that might be, that might happen again. They'll just say that, Rouhani needs more time, and your choice is this guy, and he's actually been able to deliver on this front. It's going to take more time, and they have some time to try to maybe get people ready, because I don't know what their alternative is going to be to Rouhani the next election.
And is the reference for those people what happened in 2009, or has that effectively been put under wraps, the Green Revolution as it was called?
The Green Movement, a lot of those same people have been in favor of the deal. And the one proponent of the Green Movement that I spoke to, and I said, don't you remember that you all got beat up not too long ago? They said, look, we don't want, I think once they saw how the Assad regime remained in place despite what's going on over there, and they saw how the Arab Spring unraveled a little bit like, kind of in the same direction that their 1979 revolution did, they feel like they don't have the stomach for that again. And they're hedging their bets towards change from within, and they tend to believe it. So that's where their mind is at the moment. Their thinking is at the moment.
All right, still a bit of a holding pattern for those people. Geli Kolshnik-Janad, I want to thank you for joining us from Boston. I want to thank Lee Smith for being with us from Washington. I also want to thank our panelists here in the studio, Gil Mihaly, as well as Jashmina Sani, and of course, Sanam Sethi, who has been covering blow by blow the final sprint towards this deal that was concluded this Tuesday. Thank you for being with us here. Stay with us, though. It's time for our Media Watch segment. And we say hello to James Creedon. James, it's been a historic day. I've seen the hashtags morph.
Yes, indeed.
It was Iran talks, and now it's Iran deal that we're seeing.
Iran deal or Iran talks peace, various different hashtags sort of grouping together the reactions online, Francois. I think what we saw a lot of in the last number of days were images such as this one, Iran deal loading. A lot of people expecting that to come through, and it kept dragging on. There was even this tweet yesterday from Hassan Rouhani, essentially fetting a victory ahead of the official time. Iran deal is a victory of diplomacy.
Hit send a little too early.
Yes, and then it got deleted. But today we did get to actually have the official reactions, and a lot of reactions from, for example, the White House and other official accounts reassuring the doubters or the naysayers about the merits of this deal. The Iran nuclear deal will cut off all of Iran's potential pathways to a bomb. So sort of graphics like this simplifying down or boiling down the elements of the agreement into something that can be easily digested by the public or by those who doubt the merits of the deal. There was also this image under the nuclear deal. International inspectors will monitor Iran's nuclear program at every single stage. Perhaps messages intended for the likes of the Republican leader of the Speaker of the House. Speaker of the House, thank you. Iran deal will fuel a nuclear arms race, he said. And he said it's not about Republicans versus Democrats. This is about right versus wrong. So we're getting a lot of this sort of moralistic rhetoric saying that this is a bad deal, and indeed it threatens to legislate against it. And Obama responding to that, saying that he will veto any legislation that would block an Iran deal. So that's how it's playing out to some extent on the US Twitter sphere. Meanwhile, here in France, we're seeing images going up online of a smiling Laurent Fabius. You were saying earlier, Francois, he was perceived as one of the more hawkish members, foreign ministers of the P5+1 group, but certainly he seemed happy with the deal as it came through today. Also tweeting words of reassurance, echoing what we're seeing on the White House Twitter account. All sanctions will automatically be reintroduced, he said on his Twitter page, in the case of Iran violating these nuclear commitments. Also images such as that over the last number of days on his Twitter account, showing a sort of historic quality to these talks, black and white photos being put up. So a lot of PR as well on these official accounts, of course.
All right, and we see that everybody's getting their talking points in. You were telling us earlier about Benjamin Netanyahu effectively saying the same message that he said that he said in speeches he made, first in Hebrew, then in English. I have a question for you on this, Gil Maheli. Earlier, our Jerusalem correspondent said there's division, even among hawks inside of Israel, saying that it's not been a winning strategy, that perhaps the Israelis have isolated themselves from the whole process. Absolutely. This is not the result that Israeli government expected, and so it's a failure. Even 3 months ago, the question was raised, since this would probably be the outcome, shouldn't we join the winners and try influence from the inside? And the decision was no, we'll fight it to the end. And from what I hear, in Jerusalem, they feel it's not really the end, that there will be a second match in the Congress, so it will continue. So there's no change of strategy. And I think that also the military option, I mean the covert operation option, would be much less easy in the future, because earlier you could lean on the American help and the fact that the Europeans also were in the same camp. But in 6 or 10 months, Israel would be alone. So even for covert operation, even for intelligence operation, things will be much more difficult, and Israel has to think about the whole thing. All right, so the options are narrower, and yet, James Creedon, as I was saying, both sides still on message when it comes to Israel in this.
Well, yes, just to quickly give you a sense of how that's playing out. The Iran deal is a stunning and historic mistake.